Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session where we're going to be focusing on how to increase our first meeting conversions. Now, when you get this right, you make more money, you help more people, and you feel more confident. So it's a really, really good use of time. And I've long been fascinated in this meeting because it's still really wild to me that over the course of maybe one or two conversations, a perfect stranger will be happy to hand over their life savings for you to manage. I still think that's a really extraordinary thing to have happened. And when you look at what perfect strangers want, in order to feel like they can hand over their life savings for you to manage, there are actually four things. And I will go over those four things as we go through. So when you get this right, you can be looking at a conversion rate of around 71%. And this is vouched for as research. I've done my own research, which I will share as well. But I'm interested out of the gate, if you could rate your first meeting currently, how would you score yourself out of 10? You can pop that in the chat. How do your current meetings fare? 5, 6, 6. Yeah. Okay. 6, 7. Okay, good. Middle of the range, good. I've had number of people get in touch with me saying, I run the same meeting and sometimes they go really well and other times I don't hear from them. And I thought the meeting went really well. So that's the first question. The second question is, how confident are you that that person would then go on to become a client? So where would you rate yourself on that? For Hi, Louise. Well, hopefully you'll pick up some more tips as we go through. 6, 5. Okay, great. Well, thank you for getting involved in that. I hope by the end of this, you will have picked up some tips on how to nudge those conversions up. So if we haven't met before, hello, I'm Melissa, and I specialize in helping those in the finance sector to communicate more effectively. And advisors and planners typically come to me because they want to help more people make more money and feel more confident typically. I spent May speaking to over 100 advisors about this first meeting because, as I mentioned, I was absolutely fascinated in this dynamic, but also I was keen to know what's working well out there. What are some of those firms doing that are getting up to sort of 90% conversion rates? What are they doing differently from those who were really struggling? So I'll share my research with you. But by way of background, I started out in this world as a freelance copywriter. So it was my job to write the words on people's websites and brochures. And I got really interested in what's the psychology behind helping people make decisions or taking action. And so I went off and I studied psychology and NLP and then trained to be a coach. And I've blended my skills and specialize in the finance sector. But I don't want to talk too much about me today. If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, if we're not already, then do scan that QR code. Come and say hello. But in terms of what I wanted to cover today, I want to share some reflections to help you recognize why first meetings might be quietly losing momentum. If you're someone that sort of feels like they've gone quite well and then I don't really hear from them, like what's going on, there are some things I want to share with you. Then how you might guide the conversation crucially without sounding salesy. No one wants to sound like a pushy salesperson. That's not why we got into this business. And yet I do firmly believe that if someone is coming to us for help, it's really down to our communication skills to demonstrate that we can help them. And it's finding that sweet spot between showing that we can help them without sort of giving them a deluge of technical information. And then finally, what prospects actually need to feel before they say yes. So what is going on in their mind? It is being recorded. So I will send the recording to all of those who have registered. I know some people can't make it. I'm going to present for around 30-ish minutes, and then we'll take questions at the end. And as I've already done, I'm going to be asking for input as we go. There's lots of experience on the call, so thanks for engaging already. So why does this matter? Why, of all the things that we could be doing today, why are we focusing on first meetings? Well, when you look at the typical average lifetime value of a client, they are pretty big numbers. And I argue that as a result of this, the first meeting is one of the most profitable hours that you can spend. So getting this right, honing your skills, refining your process is all really, really valuable investment of time. Now, not only that, as you well know, you tend to do such a good job that clients typically don't leave you. So the churn is fairly low and the referral rate is typically high. So these are fairly conservative values because they're not incorporating that referral potential. So very, very valuable meeting. The other thing that you might not realize is that, and this is Morningstar's research, so this is, I think this is based in the US, but I think it probably equates over here, is that most prospects typically only speak to one or two people before they make a decision. And if they've come via referral, they might not speak to anybody else. So you don't really want to be rehearsing in front of them. And typically, if you're spending money on marketing and, whether you're doing vouch for or unbiased or whatever, you've probably spent quite a lot of money getting them to that stage. So when we're in front of them, we want to be on our front foot. And of course, the other thing that you'll be aware of is this advice gap. And I think that maybe one of the reasons the advice gap still exists in such a large way is because historically, I think this first meeting was often an opportunity to sell products, and it wasn't an opportunity to really understand what was important to the person across us. I do think that's changing. And I hope that you'll have some extra things up your sleeve by the end of the session. So in terms of how I carried out my research, I have a newsletter called Humanizing Money, which goes out every couple of weeks. And back in May, I asked whether anyone would give me 30 minutes of their time so that I could ask them some questions. And I was really, really overwhelmed with how many people said yes. So I spoke to about over 100 people. And the way the conversation went was I asked, how happy are you with your conversions? I then asked them to describe their process to me. I then asked if any areas were challenging or they dreaded that part of the conversation. I then analysed my data for themes, like looking for patterns. I then drew on existing first meeting research. There's actually loads out there, Boring Money, Vouch for, Morningstar, Vanguard, there's tons out there, but I couldn't find that much in terms of actually how you then bring this insight into practical tips and strategies and processes. So I've then created a mentoring program to address these challenges, which I will share at the end. So my key findings: many firms weren't converting in the way that they were used to. Maybe they'd sort of had a good patch and then they dropped off and they weren't sure why, or many just weren't clear on why those clients weren't coming on board. In terms of the top areas of discomfort, in the number one spot was communicating their value effectively. We just found it tricky. You're selling the invisible, you're selling something that often you don't benefit from till much further down the track. Yes, you can answer expensive questions, but how do you demonstrate that value? So this was, I heard time and time again, this was the thing that was most problematic. Related to that were discussing fees. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because actually, if you find communicating your value difficult, then when you're asking for money, again, that's not going to be easy. Again, related to that was asking for the business. You probably got into this profession to help people. You just want people to get it and come on board. You don't want to often have to go through this sales process. Then you might have had a really good meeting. They're making all the right noises, and then nothing. You don't hear from them. And it's difficult to know what to do in that moment because you don't want to sound pushy or be a pest, but you do want to sound professional and demonstrate that you want to work with them. So how do you strike that balance? And I heard this very often. And then the fifth challenge was, how do you get the right people in the top of the funnel in the first place? How do you make sure that you're attracting those people that you really want to work with? Because let's face it, you're going to probably work with them for a long time. So out of interest, who would benefit from more confidence in communicating their value? Does that reflect your experience? Or are there other things that you find challenging? So just put a yes in the chat if that is something that you want more confidence with. Yeah. Okay. Okay, lots of you. Good stuff. Well, first thing to say, of course, you're not alone with this. This is a real challenge in the industry, and one that I'm really hoping to address. Now, what you might notice though is that those challenges largely fall towards the end of the process. And there are some things that you can do much earlier upstream that can ease some of that discomfort. And what I noticed in my research is that many firms are either missing the steps completely or they're making common mistakes. And so this is what I want to come on to now, which is partly why these first meetings can quietly lose momentum. So there are 5 mistakes which can lead to this poor conversion. And I'm going to run through these at the moment, and then at the end, I'd love you to tell me if any you recognize, and I can spend a bit more time on each of them. So the first is that they're sitting in front of what I call an unscreened prospect. So a screening step, and I'll talk more about this, is essentially before you actually sit down with them and have an hour or so meeting with them, you've had a call to identify fit. Do you like this person? Do you want to work with them? Urgency, like of all the things that they could be doing now, how has this risen to the top? And is it some work that you want to do? Can you do it? Is it within your capacity and capability? So very important first step is to include a screening step. Now, if you don't do that, you can end up wasting lots of time or getting quite far down the process only to realize actually they're not quite the right fit for you and you've just wasted loads of time. And as we know, we're all super busy, don't want to be wasting time. The second is that we can adopt this wrong mindset. We can put all sorts of pressure on ourselves to, make this meeting as effective and shiny as possible. And that can really impact the rapport. Neela, I'm going to come on to that in a moment. So yes, there are a number of instruments of screening. A questionnaire is one of them. My preference is a call, and I'll come on to why. Asking ineffective questions. So this means that actually demonstrating our value can be tricky. So it's really important. Our questioning technique needs to be really refined and really honed. And that is the foundation of us being able to communicate our value. Very common, this one, talking too much and not listening enough. And this can result in them leaving the meeting and us not knowing too much about them. Often it comes from a good heart and a well-intentioned, but that's a very common one. And then finally is lacking this process really to convert. So this is often where we're not seeing the conversions that we want because our process isn't quite honed and refined. So which of those, if any, resonate with you? Five, process, yeah. 5, 3, questions, yeah. Number 1, lack of qualifying criteria, yeah. 1 and 5. 3. Okay. Great. Well, a good a good range, not screening. Okay, let's look at how we can address these then. Let's focus on the screening step first of all. So an effective screening step really rests on you having a clear idea of your ideal client so that you can listen out for the red flags, for the kind of people that you just know they're not going to be a good fit. So they might instantly out of the gate ask you how much this is going to cost, what kind of performance rate you can achieve. Already those things are like, actually, this person, I think, just wants some sort of transactional relationship. We're not right for them. Or there might be lots of other things that indicate they're not going to be a good fit. But it's really important to have done this groundwork so that when you're clear on who your target audience is, it becomes much easier to find people that fit that mold and find referees, so that when you can explain who you're looking for, it's then much easier for people to then funnel those kind of people in your direction. So in order to increase your first meeting conversion, you should know what's prompted them to get in touch, why now, as I mentioned, and see the potential of fit. And they should know what to expect in that first meeting. You know, when I did my research and I asked various firms, like, how do you run your meetings? The variety of approaches was really staggering. So some people ran those first meetings more as a kind of fact find. Others were asking, what would you do if you only had 24 hours to live? You know, so whichever way you approach this, what's fundamental is to ensure that the client knows what to expect and what you're going to be talking about in that meeting, so that they can feel comfortable and so that they feel able to be open if you've built enough trust and psychological safety. So what I mean as screening essentially is that your website has clearly spoken to them. So even if they've been referred, chances are they'll have still gone onto your website and have made the decision to go, yes, they look like friendly people. They look like they can solve my problem. Oh, look, there are people like me who have gone through their process. So this is why making sure, you know, perhaps you'll have a page on your website that says, we work well with these type of people. We don't work so well with those type of people. So that's important to get right. Your referral process is well refined. So you've got your ideal clients. You know, think of your ideal clients as clients that you would love to clone and hate to lose. What are some of those qualities that would fit that description? And that's a good starting place. Ideally, they're aware of your feed, sort of ballpark. So when they come to you, they have an idea of whether they're shopping in Aldi or Waitrose. It's not essential, but, you know, as humans, we really crave clarity and certainty. So we want to try and remove as many of the unknowns in the prospect's mind so that they can feel more settled when they're in front of us. So the instruments of screening in my mind are your website, a questionnaire. So maybe, Neela, that's what you have as part of your process, which is fine. Again, it's a good filtering measure. My favorite approach is the call. And I'll tell you why. So the call, and it only needs to be 20 to 30 minutes, is your first human touch point. So this is where you can really start to see, you know, especially if it's a virtual call, you can see the whites of each other's eyes. You can start to earn the right to ask some deeper questions later in the meeting. I don't think this is a step that should be shortcut. This is where you're able to identify the need and how urgent this is, and whether you're a good fit. And I would argue it saves time, because you're not overexposing yourself by spending loads of time with someone that's not really a good fit later on. Oh, great. Okay, so Neela has 5 to 6 questions in your calendar before the discovery call. Okay, great. Great. And Neela, you know, if it's working, great. it's this might be just about slightly refining. And as I mentioned, you can then manage their expectations about what you're going to talk about in the longer meeting. Now, some will say, oh, it takes time. I haven't really got that time. I argue it saves time. It does require skill and structure. And so having a psychologically informed structure to this is important to get them onto the next stage or to politely decline. And this is really where I hear most reluctance come from, is I don't want to feel rude if they're not the right fit, especially if they've come from a client. And yeah, I hear this time and time again. And what I would say is, once you've got a sample script, which I include in the mentoring program, it's really quite an easy thing to do, is to be able to say, listen, we only work with people who we can add significant value to. So you're coming at it from like, we don't want to take your money. We can't work with everybody, and signpost them elsewhere. But that does need quite a bit of practice. But it shouldn't be the reason you don't do the screening step. And here's an example of one of my mentees. So she was someone that hadn't quite got any clarity over a target audience when she began. And I hear this a lot as well. Just a lot of people, especially if they're starting out, will just work with anyone who will pay their fee. And that's, of course, fine if you're in the early stages of your business. But if you're, either starting to inherit clients from other people, or, you're maturing as a business, having this foundation of who you want to work with is really, really important. Another typical mistake that people make is, diving too quickly into the technical side of the job. And this is very common because you've done masses of technical training. And if someone asks you a technical question, you do have to be very disciplined and have some prompts in your mind to go, oh, this is what I say then, to take you out of the technical realm. A lot of you are very generous by nature and will give lots of information for free. And that can really impact the conversion rates as well. So, yeah, hands up now if you're interested. If you weren't doing a screening step, have I encouraged you to think about it differently? Yeah, raised your hand. Good stuff. Okay, I'm happy to take questions on this at the end. Yes, but the extra time factor puts me off. Okay, I totally agree. I know, and I hear this a lot. And I think if your conversions in your first meetings are pretty high, then maybe you don't necessarily need to do that screening step. It would depend on how ready they are when they get to that first meeting to proceed. So let's turn to the first meeting itself. And your mindset has a big role to play in this. Now, this is the second mistake that I heard. And that simply is that, given what I said about how important this meeting is, we can put all sorts of pressure under ourselves and tell ourselves things like, oh my gosh, I've got to get this right. I've got to be convincing. I need to look impressive. I need to show how much I know so that they feel like their money's in safe hands. Oh, and then I've got to convert them. So I've got to try and remember what to say. And we can get into a real kind of tiz about it. All very normal and natural. If we feel some doubt around communicating our value and our fees, again, we can feel a little bit nervous about this and be a little bit stuttery. Or we can simply be, I just don't like this area. I got into this role because I want to solve technical, complex problems. I just see this step as a bit of a barrier to being able to do the work that I want. I hear them all the time. What I would say to you is try and remove all of that and set an intention just to connect with this other human being. You'll have all of that, and a lot of this is down to practice and experience, but if you set that intention just to connect with them, what we know from a neuroscience perspective is that we will feel that. We have these mirror neurons, which are in the front of each of our brains, and they are literally like neural Wi-Fi. And you will know yourself, if you feel like someone's got an agenda, they're trying to manipulate you or they're trying to sell you something, you can just feel it and our defenses go up. So if you are able to do some exercises to help you feel more confident and go into that meeting knowing that you can help people like this, you've done enough research, you've seen quite a lot to be fairly confident that you can help people like them, and they've come to you saying that they need the help, then essentially it's often just about having some confidence in your process to move them to bring them on board. So remember, we can pick up people's intentions. So just set that intention to connect with them as a human being. Let's move on to asking effective questions. And this is because of, the foundation of how we demonstrate value rests on good questions. So what happens when we ask an ineffective question? We've probably all done it. We've asked a question and it hasn't landed well. What, in your experience, happens next? Yeah, you get a short closed answer, which is no good at this meeting because what we're wanting to do is learn as much as we can about them. Yeah, we can get into this awkward moment and the meeting sort of lurches from one awkward moment to the next. Can get a frosty response. Yeah. And often that's down to not framing the question correctly. So if people don't know why we're asking the question, they can feel like, why do you want to know that? I don't want to tell you that. We haven't necessarily earned the right to ask that question yet. Or they don't understand why we're asking. So in my mind, what can happen is, as you mentioned, we can get a really short answer when we're looking for depth or we're looking for details. We get no answer, as you said, I don't know. The question was too big. They weren't prepared for it. Or now this happened to a client of mine, a little bit like what you were saying, Eloise, is you get this frosty response. So a couple had come in, they're having a first meeting, they wanted to know whether they had enough and were going to be able to retire. My client had asked, well, listen, let me know what savings you had. And that got the defenses up. They weren't sure why she was asking that. I mean, it sounds obvious, doesn't it, why she would want to know that for us. But she could feel their defenses go up, and it was almost as if they felt, well, why do you want to know that? It just feels like you want to get more of your hands on our money. So how we frame questions is really important, how we sequence them. And then the other thing is, when we're asking good questions, what we want to do is see where we are able to identify a gap that they've got or a need that they have. And it might be that they didn't even know they had that need, but the questioning can really help that. So some questions that can be hard to answer in a first meeting, especially if they've come out of the blue and the prospect wasn't expecting them. What does financial security look like? Now, for someone that's done loads of thinking around this, maybe they're approaching retirement and they've given tons of thought to this, that might be an easy question for them to answer. However, there is plenty of research out there that shows that people will give a 3-week holiday more attention than a 30-year retirement. So remember, lots of people just don't know what a retirement looks like, what financial security would look like. It's a good question. It's just not from a standing start, as it were. What's your earliest memory of money? This is a question that's quite common in the States. I just don't think it's a hard question to answer. And lots of people will start their meetings by wanting to get to know the clients, coming from a well-intentioned place, but it can be difficult if they've never given it any thought, or difficult to communicate the relevance of why you're asking that. And then I am going to go out on a bit of a limb with this one because I know it's asked a lot and favoured by lots of firms. However, again, if you've done lots of thinking about this, fine. But if that question was sprung on me, imagine 3 years from now, what would have had to happen personally and professionally for it to be a success? Again, that's a big, far-reaching far-reaching question, very difficult to answer without any thought. So what about some actual questions that can be useful? This question, what would make this meeting an excellent use of your time? Inspired by David Scarlett, it just signals that this is their meeting. You can set the agenda. Yes, of course, you'll have your own structure that you want to work through, but right out the gate, this is about them and what they want to get out of it. Next one, what are you looking for? Now, many times people will come to you, no doubt, and they will have all of their finances pretty up together. And a mentee of mine was in this exact situation a while back. She was talking to someone who's really senior. He had got his tapered allowances sorted out. He'd got various pensions, knew exactly how much was in them. And my mentee would have historically gone, oh my gosh, I have no idea where I'm going to help this person. They seem like they're very up together and know pretty much just as much as I do. And because she then asked this question, it sounds like you know a lot about this already. What are you looking for from me? It was at that point when he said, well, I know what I'm doing now, but if I stay in this job, I'm going to be dead by the time I'm 50. And so I need some help to figure out what this looks like going forward and what changes I can make. So boom, straight away there, we've got some urgency. He'd felt safe enough to be vulnerable and share that with her. And then she could move the conversation on to identifying the gaps that he had in his plan. Scaling, if ever you've been on my sessions before, and I know some of you have, you'll know that I'm a big fan of asking, out of 1 to 10, as I did with you at the start, how financially confident are you feeling? And this is a great question because it's relatively easy for people to answer. And it's important, if you do ask this question, to then ask the follow-up question, which is, what would make it a 6 if they scored a 5? Or I'm interested to know why you didn't choose a 4. So you're getting a sense of what they know already or what they've done about this already. And just a really lovely conversational way to start to make some of what you're doing tangible. And yeah, another client of mine, as using them in the planning meetings, wouldn't have typically asked this question, asked it a couple of weeks ago. They scored a 5, which was, and he said, why only a 5? And that was at that point they said, well, our mortgage is up for renewal, and we're worried about how that's going to impact our finances. Might not have found that out had he not asked the scaling question. So yeah, it's really important to make sure that this timing and the sequencing is important. We don't want to go in too big with the big questions. Got to earn the right to get there. Next mistake is talking too much and not listening enough. And what I notice often, as I mentioned earlier, is that often advisors will talk too much about themselves, especially at the start. They'll talk too much about technical topics, using lots of technical language that often is unfamiliar to our prospects, or they'll give too much away. As I mentioned, they'll hear a technical problem and go, I know how to solve this, and start trying to solve it in the meeting. It's really, really common, often coming from a good place. But what we're doing in doing that is we are not learning enough about them, because when we're talking, we're not learning. And what we want for that person to leave that meeting feeling like you totally understand them and you get them and you've understood what's important to them. So then the 5th mistake really is not having this slick process. And just curious, I think there was quite a lot of you wanted to work on their process. I think I saw quite a few of you doing that. Let me share. Now, this is really what I teach in the mentoring program. And Harriet was someone who got 2 new clients in the first 3 months of the program. The program's 6 months. Essentially, what we're looking at is making sure that the before, during, and after process is slick. So part one is where we're really looking at identifying your ideal clients, as I mentioned earlier, and then how to structure that initial call. What are the good questions to ask? How do you set the call up? How do you structure it? And how do you follow up? And what do you do? And how do you say it if you need to part ways? So lots of questions, important questions to ask. I think this is the thing when we were talking about the challenges upstream, lots of people don't get this initial bit right. And when you get this bit right, everything else is so much easier, so much slicker. Again, this is another mentee. She joined the program because she wasn't very confident about discussing fees. And just with a few tweaks and a different way to demonstrate value, she was much more confident on that initial call around how to discuss fees. And yeah, that person went on to become a client. So the next part of the program is really about the meeting itself. And this is around different ways to make the value that you bring visible, whether that's through conversational stories, whether that's through different techniques, illustrations, things like that, and how you make sure that you feel confident discussing fees. It is can be a scratchy area, but it really doesn't have to be. And a lot of it is around, do you think you can add value? A lot of it is in your mindset. And then it's about lots of practice with a few sentence stems to help you get there. And then the last part really is after the meeting, what happens? Do you follow up within 24 hours? Do you capitalize on that momentum that you've created? And lots of people who don't necessarily have that slick process, it doesn't happen as quickly as it needs to. And that's when things can then start to slip and the momentum can start to be lost. If you're getting ghosted, which is such a dispiriting place to be in, especially if you have, spent ages getting them to that point, I've got some approaches that are really working well. Just out of interest, is ghosting an issue for any of you on the call? Some of you it might be, and some of you, hopefully you're attracting people. Yes. Oh, it's so frustrating, isn't it? And it brings up all sorts of emotions in us. However, it doesn't. I've got a number of approaches that have been shown to get quick responses. It is hard to tell if it's ghosting or just busy, isn't it? It is, but and I think there is a sequence of follow-up messages that will determine whether it's busyness or it's just not of interest, or the client just doesn't feel like they can share that actually they don't want to move forward. Anyway, in terms of getting results, the modules are self-paced, and then we have 12 fortnightly Q&A calls. So this is really where we rehearse things, we dissect things, we look at the meetings that you've got coming up, the meetings that you've had. They really help to hold you accountable to changing some approaches and strategies. And then we also have 2 face-to-face days. So it's all very well learning this information and practicing it, but actually we need to be face-to-face to really hone these skills. So the things that prospect need to feel before they say yes. Remember I said right at the beginning that there are 4 things that perfect strangers wanted from a first meeting. And if you can deliver them, you can expect a conversion rate of 71%. So what are those things? Well, this is vouched for's research. And they found that prospects who couldn't have felt more comfortable being open. So again, that's all about you being in the right mindset, you setting the right intention, managing their expectations around what they're going to be talking about, had an in-depth conversation on their motivations. So this is really where you want the bulk of the conversation to be. Couldn't have been clearer on how the advisor could help. So this is about really being fluent in identifying the gaps, talking about your process, and learned a lot. So this is the sweet spot between sharing some information, maybe it's some concepts that illustrate the urgency, creating this, what I call appropriate urgency, so they can understand some basic financial concepts. Hopefully they'll leave going, gosh, we'd be crazy not to move forward. So those are the 4 elements. That's what people need to feel and see in order to get that conversion rate of 71%. So as you can see, this is one of the most profitable meetings that you can run. And as a result, the skills to run those meetings, I would argue, are among the most valuable. And of course, for your prospects, it potentially is one of the most life-changing meetings they can have. And I don't want to sound, I don't want to overstate it, but you'll know yourself because of all the good work that you do. Having you in their corner has really helped to smooth out their life. They don't have to worry too much about the budget, or if they do, they know that you've got a plan in place to figure out what to do so they don't run out of money. I think often we can sometimes forget about all the great value that we're able to offer, and getting into that mindset before you have these screening calls and these meetings is really important. So in terms of the program, it's 1,550 per head. You can pay in installments, and as you can see, just getting one new client, it will pay for itself. So if you'd like to find out more, it's not right for everybody. I do want to make sure that you're going to get as much value out of it as possible. So this is where I will have a quick call with you just to check it's a good fit. Do scan that. The next cohort is starting in February. So we've got our first Q&A on the 3rd of Feb. And the first 5 that join will receive my ACO annual review pack, which is, of course, another very, very important meeting. But that topic is for another day. So I just want to look at the time. Yes, we have got some time for questions now. Does anybody want to ask me anything? While you're thinking about that, I just want to make sure that I recap some of the key points. So those reasons why first meetings can quietly lose momentum. We're not doing that screening step, or we're not doing it well. We're adopting the wrong mindset, so rapport can be a bit of a challenge. We're asking ineffective questions, so we're not identifying where the value is that we can add. We're talking too much, or our process isn't that refined, or we don't really have a process at all currently. Guiding the conversation, it's all about stages. It's all about identifying things at certain stages, and the program will help you do that. And then in terms of what prospects need to feel before they say yes, they've got to feel comfortable in being open. They've got to be able to trust you. And they need to feel like you really get them, their motivation. They need to have learned a lot and really clear on how you can help. So I'd just like to finish with my favorite Irish proverb, which is a good beginning is half the work. So if you get the stuff upstream right, the rest of it becomes much more easy and much more fluent. So any questions? Eloise, do you know when your next cohort will be, and I can register? Yes, you can. I've got you on my list already, Eloise, for the next cohort in terms of, letting you know when it will be. I would imagine it will probably be around April time. I don't know, after the financial year. So yes, I would love to have you. I know you've got lots of things on your plate currently. Does anyone else want to ask me anything about what I've shared, or any clarity on my research, or? No. Okay, well, I will follow up with the recording of this, and do feel free to watch it again. Maybe I've covered quite a lot and you want to pause and watch it. But yeah, I'll call it quits there. All right. Thank you so much for joining.